Rochelle is a character that frustrates me every single time that I watch The Craft because I always think, had she just been able to put a small pause on her friendship with Nancy, taken a brief hiatus or a step back, she would still have full access to her powers and abilities. But no, and that's why she's at where she's at. But before I get into the rest, it's Black Witch Month, which means that for every day that I can this month, I'll be talking about a Black witch in TV and movie, and today I'll be talking about Rochelle Zimmerman from The Craft. Now, not much is known about Rochelle's backstory prior to Sarah arriving, and even after that, we don't get much about her. She's one of the more mysterious people in the Craft group. But what we can gather is that Rochelle is a decent swimmer, having been on her high school swim team. She grew up presumably wealthy, and she experiences a lot of racism at the hands of another student named Laura Lizzie. But aside from this, among all of the girls in the group, Rochelle seems to be the one with the least amount of problems and the most grounded. And this is unfortunate because the way she starts the series and the way she ends it are completely different. Rochelle is also known to have the best sense of humor in the group as well. So when we're first introduced to Rochelle at the beginning of the film, we see her, Nancy, and Bonnie walking down the hallway of their high school heading towards their locker. And it's at this time that we also get some information about the trio. The first is that this group of girls is kind of exclusive. They don't really do outsiders. Conversely, outsiders don't really do them either because they kind of have the reputation of being occultist. Because at one point during that scene, we see some boys say that they're Satan worshippers and then they head to their lockers. And this is kind of where you see the group dynamics between the three of them. Bonnie being very vigilant, keeping an eye out for this missing puzzle piece that they've been looking for. Nancy being a cynic, and Rochelle just kind of going with the flow and bantering back and forth with Nancy. And so this is kind of the dynamic that sticks with the three of them for the entire film. So after Sarah arrives at their high school and Bonnie reveals to the other two that Sarah is likely their fourth, Sarah then walks up to their table in a biology lab and asks if she can join their lab group. This is where you see the dynamics really at play between the three of them. Nancy's really hostile and very standoffish. Bonnie's kind of meek, but really wants to invite her to join them. And Rochelle just kind of sits there saying nothing, very much like a follower. And this is a trend that keeps up for Rochelle during the entire film. The only other bit of insight that we get during these first 10 minutes of the film about Rochelle's character is when Chris and Sarah are talking outside during lunch and Chris is telling her about the three of them. For Bonnie, he says that she's got scars all over her body. For Nancy, he says that she's a slut and spreads disease. And then for Rochelle, he just skips her. All right, she's nobody in the school. And this is probably a characteristic of her being the only Black girl in their high school. But later on, we kind of see where this comes into play for Rochelle when we see her and Laura get into it after swim practice because Laura is a blatant racist and is bullying Rochelle for her curly hair. Now later on, Sarah is formally reintroduced to the group on better terms while she's standing outside of Chris's football practice. And it's here that we see the three of them cordially invite her to go shoplifting with them at their local spiritual shop. And it's during this scene where they're shoplifting in the magic shop that we kind of get the characteristic of Rochelle's personality, which is just peak followership. And I never noticed this until this point, but Nancy really is like the Regina George of the 90s. I never noticed it because Bonnie and Rochelle do not question her. And it's not until Sarah or Katie Heron comes to town that things really start to be mixed up. But I digress. So anyways, after Rochelle and the group go shoplifting, they end up meeting again and they meet in the woods to summon Manon just to see if Sarah actually is their fourth. And lo and behold, she is. And it's during these scenes in the woods where the girls are conversating and hanging out that we learn about the issues each one of them is having. And this is where we hear about Rochelle's experience with Laura and that she bullies her incessantly for being African American. She makes fun of her hair texture. She just says the most outlandish things to her, and it's hurtful to Rochelle. But because Sarah's a very good friend, she has a solution for that. The four of them do. Now, the deeper the four get into their magic, the darker it gets. At one point, they're having a lot of shallow fun with it, practicing things like glamour magic, levitation, and basic spell work. But later on, it elevates to calling the corners and invoking some very powerful forces. Rochelle, in this case, manages to invoke the guardian of the Watchtower of the West, or water and intuition. And this is where the hijinks kind of end and the trouble begins for the girls. And at one point in the midst of all this, we see how truly chaotic their powers have become. Because as a good friend, Sarah pulls out a piece of Rochelle's enemy's hair. She then braids it into Rochelle's hair. And then we see the effects of these powers. Laura goes bald. Her hair is falling out in clumps. She's devolved into the floor of the locker room in swim practice crying. But it does appear to have its intended effect on Laura, because later on in the film, we meet Laura again at Chris's party, and she's a lot nicer to Rochelle. But at what cost? And towards the end of the film, despite how good of a friend Sarah had been to all of them, but in particular Rochelle and Bonnie, they both decided to turn on her as a result of her trying to bind their powers because she'd seen how corrupt they'd become. But it always made me upset that they were so willing to turn on her, and it wasn't until I'd seen a deleted scene from The Craft that I realized why. And it's in this deleted scene, which they should have left in, that explains why Bonnie and Rochelle were so loyal to Nancy. And this is because at one point, Nancy was their only friend and the only one who would talk to them. This is also where we learn that Rochelle is the only black girl living in her neighborhood and likely the only black girl at her school. But anyways, let me know if you liked Rochelle in the comments. I think she deserved more as a character, but I will see you in my next video.